her voice changes completely, and she tells me, "You can't do that because she belongs to me." I'll tell you that story in just a moment. You're going to like this story. Listen, if you're a fan of the mind, brain, and hypnosis, plus if you like stories about healing, you've come to the right place, because here, Dr. Flavio, I explain hypnosis. This woman comes to see me to lose weight. She had about 30 or 40 pounds excess weight, not by my judgment, based on her weight and her height. We have these basic tables, called BMI, the body mass index, very simple calculations. And essentially, according to her height, she should weigh about 30 to 40 pounds less. Not an extreme amount of weight, not a big deal. But, she told me that she had been persistently 30 to 40 pounds overweight for quite a few years, and nothing that she had tried had worked for her. So, again, this is before the era of these new medications. I have no idea what to tell her. I'm not a dietitian. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not an exercise coach. I'm a hypnotist. So what do? I hypnotize her. And as I hypnotize her, because what is our strategy? The only thing I can do is to hypnotize the person, because in the hypnotic state, the person's mind becomes suggestionable. We can drive a suggestion in, and as we say in our parlance, that suggestion can stick, and the person will end up eating less and feeling more motivated to exercise more. Now, the natural consequence of eating less and exercising more, it's not magic. It's just that eating less and exercising more will gradually lead to the adjustment of the person's body weight. That's all that's happening there. There's no magic. People ask me, oh, does hypnosis can magically? No, it's not like that. We change behavior, eating less and exercise more, and as a result, people lose weight. That's all there is. So she goes into hypnosis, and as I said earlier, that voice comes along, very strong, and you can't do this, she belongs to me, that kind of thing. To make a long story short, and I have done this hundreds and hundreds of times, I'm going to make a parenthesis here to tell you something. I don't know what's going on there. I don't claim to understand what happened there. The term that they use in hypnotherapy for that kind of experience is depossession. The church uses the word exorcism. I used to use both of those words. I no longer do. And I no longer claim to understand what happened or what happens in those cases. I'll tell you what happened. I've been practicing hypnotherapy for 30 years. And when I was very young, 30 years ago when I started, I thought I knew everything. I thought I had an answer for everything. And my answers were so clever, and I had a certain success rate, quite high compared to the average. But, frankly, our success rate nowadays is much, much, much higher. But I've noticed over the years, the less I think I know and the less I try to explain, the less I talk, the better results we get. So perhaps there's an explanation to that. But I don't really know the better way to, the best way to explain to you what happened there. All I know is that this lady sitting at the chair, at the office, changes her demeanor, her expression, and her voice in a way that is consistent with a man of African American descent speaking to me in a very stern way, not rude, but very stern, almost like upset at me, and essentially telling me that I cannot do this. And when I press the question as to what is it that I cannot do, he's essentially telling me, and it's a he because he identifies, this voice identifies as a he with a name and this and that, and says, look, you can't do this because she belongs to me. You cannot take me out of here. She belongs to me and I belong with her. So this is the story that this voice or this woman tells me while in the hypnotic state. None of this I knew prior to the hypnosis. She told me that the voice told me that quite a few, several years ago or before the session, she was very lonely. She had been divorced. She couldn't meet anybody. She couldn't form a relationship. And she felt extremely lonely to the point where it was very, very painful for her. So somebody told her that there was a ritual that she could do to never feel lonely again. And she went into, the voice, I guess, told me the whole story. She went into a particular place. I don't want to get into too many details because I really don't want to bring attention to those methods because I don't practice those methods. I don't know anything about it. But the voice told me where this woman went, who she spoke with, what kind of ritual they did. And in that ritual, essentially what she did was, quote unquote, marry this spirit or this entity, with the result that in reality she never felt lonely again. She didn't feel lonely, but she was alone in terms of, physically she had no husband, right? Now, during the Middle Ages, these sorts of experiences were quite common, both for men and women. During an age of religious oscurantism, they used to call it the incubus, and where a person would report this idea of literally having sexual relations with spirits, both men and women. So this has been out there for many, many years, and the fact is that this entity kind of became a part of this person's life. She had mentioned to me that a few years ago she had mysteriously developed a problem in her uterus and had a hysterectomy. The doctors removed her uterus, and she had mentioned that, and she thought that was because of her excess weight. The entity or this voice told me that he made that happen so that she wouldn't even think of being with anybody else to have children or anything like that. This woman was, at the time, still in reproductive age and so forth, but a relatively young woman. But anyway, we go through the processes of hypnotherapy, and after some time, this so-called entity basically goes away, or her imagination accepts the notion that the entity went away, whichever. The point is that there's a separation there. To tell you the end of the story, the woman loses weight, and I saw her a few more times over a period of a few months, and she did very, very well. And but what really surprised me was during that session, when she comes out of the hypnotic state, I asked her whether she had done this particular ritual. And I repeat to her what I had just heard, essentially from her, right? And she becomes like, oh my gosh, like super surprised. And she goes, how do you know that? Apparently, she was not aware of the conversation that I was having with this so-called entity during the hypnosis. And I described it to her. I said, look, I heard this, this, and this, and this. Is this true? And she goes, yes, but nobody knows that. And then, since we had already discussed it, she told me the whole story. She added a few more details. And she goes, yeah, I was dying of loneliness. I was dying. I was too lonely. I couldn't meet anybody. I was in pain. And this friend of mine told me to go to this place and do this ritual. I did. And indeed, I never felt lonely again. I felt normal, except I couldn't stop eating. It's almost as if, symbolically speaking, she was eating for two, right? But she never felt lonely again. And I find that to be fascinating. She after this whole, she did have a hysterectomy. That was true. She had told me this ahead of time, and she says, okay, I'm ready to start a new life and to see how I can meet people and adjust my weight and so forth. I saw her a few more times. She started losing weight. She started doing well. And essentially, at some point, she felt that she was done seeing me, and I didn't see her again. But I like that story because if that woman had come into a conventional talk therapist to talk about her weight problems, I think we would have talked about it for thousands of years and never gotten to that particular type of explanation. Now, in all fairness, is that explanation real, or is it all in her imagination? I cannot answer that question. I don't know. Maybe it is her imagination. Maybe it is real. But I'll tell you I'll tell you one thing, she had been steadily gaining weight for several years. And after that experience, she started steadily losing weight until I last saw her several months later. So she told me when she came in that nothing that she ever did worked, to lose weight, and now she started losing weight. So is it all in her imagination? Perhaps, but whatever she imagined helped her adjust her weight. So once again, if you like stories about healing, you've come to the right place, because it is right here that Dr. Flavio explains hypnosis. Talk soon.